welcome back to my philosophy channel, The Philosopher's Diary. Today I'm going to be talking about part 2 of Nietzsche's The Genealogy of Morals. So just for a quick review, in my last video, when Nietzsche was born, there's this whole atheistic movement because of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. Now the theory of evolution cast doubt on the biblical creation story. And because it cast doubt on the biblical creation story, it cast the rest of the Bible into doubt. Because if the biblical creation story was not accurate or specific or even true, then how would we know whether or not the rest of the Bible is also accurate? It was into this society that Nietzsche was born, and because of this removal of God and because of the removal of morals and objective morals and an objective purpose, people were left with a void. They fell into what is called nihilism. Nihilism being the belief that life has no meaning and no purpose. And so into this void, Nietzsche said, quote, "God is dead and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, murderers of all murderers?" And so the genealogy of morals is essentially asking the question, where did morals come from? What is their genealogy? Because if in fact we live in an atheistic society, then where are these morals coming from, if not from a God? Today I'm going to get down to the meat of the genealogy of morals. So, in the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche proposes that morals originated when the lower class demonized the values of the upper class in order to regain power. Specifically, Nietzsche speaks about Jesus Christ. Around 36 BC, the Romans conquered Palestine because Palestine was located right between Syria and Egypt, and the Romans had a legion in each of those spots. And so they needed Palestine to be at peace in order for their military operations to run smoothly. Now, around 6 BC, Emperor Augustus appoints Pontius Pilate as prefect over this area. And Pontius Pilate's job was to keep the Jews in line. This proved to be especially difficult because of, first off, the wealth gap between the Jews and the secular merchants and the Romans, as well as the great cultural differences between the two groups. Furthermore, even though there were at that time many sects of Judaism that all had their own specific takes on what Judaism was, they all believed that they had a right to independence as God's children, and so they resented the Roman rule. And so, this is where Jesus Christ comes into the picture. Nietzsche believes that Jesus Christ takes the situation, he ends up demonizing the values of the Romans, who were the upper class at that time. For example, in Matthew 5:39, Jesus states, "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." At first glance, we might interpret this that we are supposed to receive and remain victims of our oppressors. But in the Old Testament, it states, Exodus 21:23 through 24. "But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot." This verse promotes the idea of justice and revenge. According to this verse, it should be slap for slap. This would make Jesus contradictory with the Old Testament, but Jesus did not claim to be contradictory with the Old Testament. He did not claim to be a revolutionary rewriting the Old Testament. In fact, he claimed the contrary. Matthew 5:17. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." What then could Jesus have meant by turning the other cheek? I think his message becomes clear if we add more context. Romans 12:20. "To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head." In essence, Jesus saying to the Jews to turn the other cheek heaps burning coals on the heads of the Romans, because by so doing, the Jews are taking control of the narrative of morality. So by controlling the narrative of morality, the Jews are controlling subliminally the Romans. Because now, by creating this idea of taking the higher path or being the bigger person, the Jews have created this environment where the Romans now have to struggle with inner conflict and guilt before they're even able to harm the Jews. And Jesus continues to play and hype on this theme and talk about political power dynamics through phrases like, "Blessed are the meek," and "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." I think this verse about the camel is especially interesting because during the time, most of the people who were rich were Romans, not Jews. So in essence, Jesus is a little bit implying that it is very difficult for a Roman to get into the kingdom of heaven. Jesus characterized what the ambitious and the powerful do as weak, as evil. But Nietszche would say that in reality, good and evil do not exist, but were created from a power struggle. Nietszche would also say that for these aristocrats to subscribe to the morality of Jesus, that they should treat the lesser as well as themselves, he would say that this morality of Jesus's is a weak morality. Thus, as Nietszche would say, quote, "Weakness is turned to merit." Now, this quote is obviously confusing as it introduces a premise that Nietszche had previously gotten rid of. In other words, by saying weakness is turned to merit, Nietszche has reintroduced the idea of objective morality, or at least his version of morality. In other words, he is saying that good is weakness. That what we consider good is weakness or bad. And what we consider bad is merit or good. So obviously this seems contradictory. And maybe this is the way to interpret Nietszche, though it is extremely radical. Nevertheless, Nietzsche's work is known to be riddled with many different contradictions, and there are multiple interpretations of Nietszche, and I think that perhaps it's an assumption to assume that Nietszche was trying to create a singular, consistent overall theory. It is speculated that Nietszche is trying to portray the ambiguity of life and the ambiguity of morality throughout his works. Either way, I just wanted to say this is my interpretation of Nietszche. There are multiple interpretations out there, and while they have some commonalities, I think multiple could be correct. Just for note, my interpretation based off of me reading the Genealogy of Morals and a couple of commentaries. In the last part of the Genealogy of Morals, Nietszche brings up a second reason why he thinks this morality still persists today. Quote, "What if nothing proves itself to be divine, unless it be error, blindness, lies?" So in this last section of the Genealogy of Morals, Nietszche proposes that the ascetic ideals of Stoicism, Judaism, and Christianity, they champion these ideals of self-control, abstinence, and discipline. But Nietszche believes that these are not the real values that will help man, but that they are only a distraction from the suffering of man. Nietszche believes in the aristocratic values that have been, as he would say, demonized. But if these ascetic values are merely a distraction from suffering, why does humanity still persist in them? Nietszche says this is because man needs a purpose, that man is not opposed to suffering. The true goal of life to Nietszche is to have a will to life, a purpose. It's the goal of life to Nietszche is not to be happy. Nietszche believes that man will even seek out suffering provided he has a purpose for that suffering. It is not from suffering that humanity runs, but is from senselessness. And the ascetic ideals give the suffering a sense. They provide meaning in the suffering. Quote, "From the ascetic ideal, this hate of the human, and even more of the animal, and more still of the material, this horror of the senses, of reason itself, this fear of happiness and beauty, this desire to get right away from all illusion, change, growth, death, wishing and even desiring, this all means, let us have the courage to grasp it, a will for nothingness, a will opposed to life, a repudiation of the most fundamental conditions of life. But it is and remains a will. And to say at the end that which I said at the beginning, man will wish nothingness rather than not wish at all." Thank you for watching my video today. Please like and subscribe. If there are any videos you would like me to make about existentialism or any other podcast series that you would like me to start about different topics, please feel free to leave that in the comments. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again.